Today, I'm going to show you whether the DJI Neo is better, worse, or just as good as a normal FPV Tinywhoop for beginners. We're going to put this, one of my favorite OG Tinywhoops, the Beta FPV Meteor 75 Pro, head-to-head against the DJI Neo with 10 major categories. You're going to find out what the pros and cons are to each, what the cost of the setups are, and which one you should consider buying if you're in the market for a new drone. So, without further ado, let's start off with category 1, build quality. Without a solid foundation, a drone is going to fly terribly, break quickly, and simply be a piece of trash that ends up in the bin after a few flights. And look, we don't want that now, do we? No, the answer is no, we don't want that at all. After flying both of these drones in some pretty rough conditions and making sure I sent it into the ground a few times, intentionally of course, I am actually pretty stoked with the both of them. The Neo has held up to multiple high-speed crash landings, and only recently, after completely sending it straight into a tree, has it actually cracked the frame. Luckily, I have been able to force the plastic frame back in a bit, so it can still fly perfectly fine, but yeah, it's absolutely possible to break the frame. Aside from this recent crack, it has been surprisingly durable considering how light and cheap the plastic feels, which is also exactly why I think it doesn't break as easily as well. If this cheap and light plastic was instead made out of a heavier material, it probably would have broken from the heavier force. The exact same can be said about the Meteor 75 Pro as well, although in its attempt to be a much lighter drone over the Neo, it seems to feel even more fragile and breakable, but to settle that one straight away, I have smashed this thing into loads of things over an entire year of use, and I think I've only needed to swap out the frame once, so build quality, I'm calling a tie on. Next up is the ease of use for beginners. I'm talking about what the experience is like from the moment a complete newbie gets their new drone out of the box and just wants to fly it. Can they fly it straight away? Is anything going to confuse them? Are there any easy modes to get them going? You see, back when I got my first FPV drone, it came bound to my controller straight from the box, meaning I didn't have to do a thing. I could just pick it up, charge it, and fly it, although not very well. The issue that we face with both the Neo and the Meteor 75 Pro is that neither of them currently come as a bundle that includes an FPV controller or goggles bound directly to them. That means for the Neo, you'll need the DJI Remote 3 and DJI Goggles 3. For the Meteor 75 Pro, you can pick whatever you fancy. In my case, I've chosen to go with an ELRS connection from my Boxer controller to my drone, and the HD0 goggles with an analog video receiver attached to the side. Straight away, the lack of options of what can actually be used with the Neo is actually a massive plus for beginners, as there are plenty of videos for pairing the drone to the controller and goggles easily. The Meteor 75 Pro, on the other hand, requires a bit more research and understanding into how to set up ELRS on your controller and then actually bind it to the drone. Plus, wrapping your head around analog video channels can also be a bit of a pain in the ass too. So it is all here on YouTube, but it does take that little bit more initiative than the Neo itself. Setup aside though, what happens when you go for your first flight? Well, by default, the Neo is actually completely locked out of full manual FPV mode, meaning you're going to be forced to fly on trainer wheels, which is again actually another really big positive for beginners. There's a much higher chance of success when flying with the normal and sports modes offered on the Neo, as you can't flip it upside down or just send it straight into the ground, at least not easily. Instead, it's going to feel a bit more like a normal photography drone. It's going to hover on its own and stay in one place pretty damn well if you let go of the sticks, but flip all that on its head and you'll see where the Meteor 75 Pro comes up short in comparison. On your first flight, you might be blessed with a stabilization mode called angle mode, which is where the drone will automatically keep itself level. However, the massive difference here is the vertical power, commonly known as the throttle control. Should you let go of your controller sticks at all, you're going to watch the Meteor 75 Pro drift away from you and probably either crash land on the ground or send itself super high into the sky. This is the nature of standard FPV drones, and it's fair to say that, well, DJI have changed the game for beginners in such a positive way. For anyone going into the hobby, the simplicity and tight ecosystem of compatible gear really does make it an easy choice for me to give it the point in this category. Okay, our third category is a pretty important one, but probably for reasons other than what you'll think straight away. The category of discussion here is flight time and batteries. Now, obviously, the size of the batteries is drastically different. I mean, just look at them side by side, right? The Meteor 75 Pro batteries are blimmin' tiny, and the Neo batteries are, well, still fairly small, but they're definitely larger. They both charge up fairly quickly, and simply when using their standard chargers, the Neo charges directly through the drone unless you have the Fly More combo hub, which cost extra, while the Meteor 75 Pro charges with a small USB charger that is also a bit of a plug-and-play system. So in terms of charging and usability, both drones do seem to offer very similar methods, with the Meteor 75 Pro just pulling in front with faster charging time. This isn't anything to do with the actual charge speed though, and instead comes down to the batteries being way smaller and needing less charge to be full. But it does let you get back in the sky faster, so it's worth mentioning. Where that battery size really does show though is in the flight time. The Meteor 75 Pro is rated to 6.5 minutes, while the Neo is rated to 18 minutes. Both of those times are from the manufacturers and, as always, are really not true to life numbers. So if we're being real here, the Meteor 75 Pro is generally 3 to 5 minutes at the most, and the Neo is more like 10 to 12 minutes. So neither are gonna blow your socks off, but the Neo's flight time certainly doesn't go unnoticed. The primary difference comes down to how much power the drone is willing to take out of the battery, which is directly tied in with flight performance, but we're gonna get to that category very soon. For now, thanks to the Meteor 75 Pro letting you get back in the air way quicker, and well, the Neo allowing you to fly for way longer, I'm just gonna put this down to a tie, as it's really just preference at this point. If you want more flight time on the Meteor 75 Pro, grab another pack of batteries and charge them up quickly, or if you want more flight time without landing, the Neo is gonna be a better choice. What is in preference, however, is this next category, the cost of equipment. Now, I have specifically used the word equipment here instead of drone on its own, as it's genuinely unfair to compare the drone-only prices, and you're going to see why in just a moment. As mentioned earlier, you'll be needing the Goggles 3 and Remote 3 in order to be able to fly the Neo for FPV specifically. Likewise, you'll also be needing to purchase additional gear for the Meteor 75 Pro. I'm going to base the prices here off of budget-friendly options with the Radio Master Pocket Radio and the Earsheen EV800D FPV goggles. They're both really solid beginner choices, which is why I'm picking them here, and they also don't break the bank, so it's a win-win. But to get yourself up and running with the DJI Neo and FPV, you're going to be spending $200 on the remote, $500 on the Goggles 3, and a minimum of $200 on the base Neo, bringing your total setup cost right on up to $900. As of making this video, there is no other equipment that works with the Neo, so you are required to get their latest, shiniest, and well, most expensive stuff. Okay, Future Brody here. This is just me letting you know that you're gonna see me again in just a moment to run through where the Goggles N3 sits with this, because they were released whilst I was making this video. So yeah, a little bit of a mess up here, but I'll be back in a moment. Take the Meteor 75 Pro, however, which costs $110, a pack of batteries with a charger for $33, the pocket radio for $65, and then the EV800D analog goggles for $100, and you're left with a total of $308. That is close to a freaking $600 price difference right there. Future Brody here again. So yes, DJI released the DJI N3 goggles, which come in at $230. Now, if we swap the Goggles 3 out for these new N3 goggles, you'll be looking at a total cost of $630, which still makes the Meteor 75 Pro a much cheaper option by about $300. Yeah, this is a really nice easy win for the Meteor 75 Pro here. What's not going to be an easy win for either of these drones, however, is their camera quality. The Neo is one of the worst quality HD systems that we have seen come from DJI recently, so much so that I would easily say the older DJI 03 Air units are way better quality than what this one produces, and the Meteor 75 Pro camera is stuck in the old era of analog only video using a camera from 2022. There is also another version with HD0, but it's not what I'm using for this comparison. Now, I get that these both have their individual reasons for why they've taken their chosen paths, and so for you to understand why I've chosen the to be revealed winner, I do need to break down each of them individually. Let's start off with the Neo. From a pricing perspective, the Neo seems like a really solid offering with 4K UHD video on a half-inch sensor for just $200, and yes, with some setting tweaks, you can really get some pretty reasonable footage out of it. In fact, it is significantly better than what the original DJI Air unit was like back when I was first getting started, so I guess if I take that into consideration, this probably would have blown my mind. Obviously, the camera quality being dumbed down from many of DJI's other recent releases is thanks to the price. The cheaper the camera, the cheaper they can make the drone, which in turn leads us to where we are with the Neo, a cheap drone with an even cheaper camera system inside of it. Now, we completely switch perspectives over to the Meteor 75 Pro. we're looking at what might at first glance look like hot trash in 2024. Now, I used to be a bit of an analog hater as such. I truly just could never understand why you would want to fly with it over DJI's HD, but now, 4 years later, I'm willing to admit that I was partially wrong for that. Analog systems are super cheap, lightweight, and just really easy to use with your goggles. And funnily enough, the Meteor 75 Pro has chosen to target a super cheap and ultra lightweight market, making an analog camera system the only logical choice. If the Neo had an analog system in it, DJI wouldn't be able to lock you into their ecosystem with it, and then would likely need to increase their price to allow for that. And if we looked at the Meteor 75 Pro HD0 version with an HD system in it, it isn't going to be able to be nearly as cheap, and it weighs nearly twice as much. So it is really hard to make a clear winner here, as both camera systems are targeting totally different niche markets. So again, I'm gonna give it a tie. We are now halfway through the categories, and as of currently, the Neo and Meteor 75 Pro are neck and neck at 2.5 points each. It's gonna be interesting to see where this one goes over the remaining 5 categories, as I've left some of the most important ones till last. Speaking of important though, let's talk about flight performance. I have taken both of these drones out to multiple different locations in different weather conditions, both inside and out. Also, I know that I put them through their paces fairly. Let's start off outdoors. More often than not, if I'm going outside with my Tinywhoop, I'm going somewhere to just race it around the trees or just have some fun at a playground or something. Now, I know that this isn't everyone's cup of tea. Some people will prefer to just freestyle, others like to explore with them, so rest assured I am taking all angles into account here. The first thing you're going to notice when you fly the Meteor 75 Pro is just how touchy the throttle control is, and also how punchy it is in general. If you go full throttle, you're going to get pretty damn high pretty damn fast. Take the Neo through the same paces, however, and it's going to feel really sluggish, really slow, and just really underpowered. This underpowered drone, however, does have its advantages too. With less power, you are able to maintain a steady hover much easier in full manual mode, allowing you to possibly hit tighter gaps with less experience, and you'll probably be able to fly around less without the twitchiness as well. This advantage quickly turns into a disadvantage, however, when you're a few weeks or months down the road and you're looking to actually improve your flight skills. Due to the underpowered nature of the Neo, you will soon find its limits in most simple freestyle moves, and if you even did take it racing, I don't think you're gonna have much fun with that either. Well, look, at least I didn't anyways. Switch back over to the Meteor 75 Pro though, and once you become accustomed to the quick power, you'll find that you just have so much more room for improvement without actually being limited by the drone itself. I still haven't reached the limits of the Meteor 75 Pro yet, and I consider myself to be a reasonable pilot. Certainly not a fast one at all, but I know for a fact that with my skill level, the Neo is already a massive limiting factor over the Meteor 75 Pro. That's all to say that the Meteor 75 Pro flies with more precision, faster acceleration, and just way more power over the Neo, allowing me to happily award the Meteor 75 Pro the point here. While we're on this topic of flying in different locations and all, I think it's a perfect time to talk about the next category, wind resistant. Now, it is certainly fair to say that neither of these drones are being advertised or even partially created to be able to withstand the wind. The lightweight design makes that practically impossible, but what if you just want to go out and fly and there's a little bit of wind? What happens then? Which drone is actually going to perform the best in that situation? Well, I've flown multiple different Tinywhoops outside in some pretty decent winds before, and it is always a bit of a struggle. The Meteor 75 Pro specifically, which weighs in at 31 grams without the battery, is one of the lightest FPV drones that I've flown, and this does make it quite noticeable with the wind. I found that the drone tends to drift around and it makes the camera twitchy the higher the wind is. The Neo, on the other hand, while it certainly doesn't enjoy the wind, it has got two main advantages over the Meteor 75 Pro. Firstly is the weight of it. Coming in at 135 grams, it's able to keep itself significantly more stable in smaller breezes than the Meteor 75 Pro can. Then, to add on to that, it's also got the single axis gimbal, which doesn't have a physical lock on it, allowing it to take out a lot of those micro vibrations that the wind causes. So, if you plan on flying outdoors and it's always windy, the Neo is going to be your better friend here, winning at the point for this category. That means, still to this point, the Meteor 75 Pro and Neo are just neck and neck with points, so I'm really hoping that these last 3 categories clear this blimmin' tie up. Speaking of which, these last 3 categories actually go hand in hand, so I'm going to cover them all at the same time. We've got compatibility, repairability, and my personal favorite, future-proofing. For you to be able to see why I chose the to be revealed choice for future-proofing, you first need to hear me out on compatibility and repairability, as they just play a huge part of it all. As we already know, the Neo is compatible only with DJI products, specifically their new products too. Like, you aren't able to use the older Goggles 2 or Remote 2 with it, and specifically need to purchase the Goggles 3 and Remote 3 to fly it. That also means regardless of your hand size or preference, you're going to be forced to use DJI's game style controller that, look, from my personal experience at least, has got very small gimbals and it's not the most comfortable. All in all, it is a super limiting system. It can't be used with any other video transmissions or protocols, and it is certainly up there in price too. Meteor 75 Pro takes the complete opposite route, however, offering built-in ELRS, which is now one of the most common connections between your remote and the drone, and also uses analog as the camera system, which again can be fed into literally hundreds of different brands of goggles. The ability to utilize different brands opens up a whole new world of customization, preference, and the big one for me, budget options too. If you have the money, you can happily use it to buy the best goggles and controller on the market, but likewise, if you have a smaller budget, you can use it to keep your costs low and just buy budget gear instead. Both of which are compatible, both of which will work pretty much the same. My point here goes to the Meteor 75 Pro. We then go into the repairability side of things, as believe it or not, you're going to crash these drones as well, and eventually something will break whether you want it to or not. The DJI Neo has no spare parts or replacement parts aside from the propellers and propeller guards. The Meteor 75 Pro, however, can literally be built from the ground up with individual spare parts, meaning absolutely everything can be replaced by you or even swapped out for different components if you know what you're doing. I'm not sure how else to explain this other than saying that this is a massive negative for the Neo. FPV is all about having fun, and by forcing people to send their drone back to them, like DJI require, just to get it fixed is not what we've grown to love about this DIY hobby. So yeah, obvious point to the Meteor 75 Pro here yet again. That then brings us to my personal favorite category, future-proofing. The reason I put so much emphasis on this one in particular is because I know for most of us, buying a new drone is not an easy financial decision, and ideally you want your purchase to last for a decent period of time. By taking into consideration the fact that the Neo doesn't allow you to use your own equipment, doesn't allow you to repair it yourself, and will limit your skill growth super quickly, it's also a very simple choice for me to award the point of future-proofing to the Meteor 75 Pro. It's going to help you grow as a pilot, save your money, teach your repairability skills, and you're probably going to end up having more fun with it in the long term too. That means we've got the Meteor 75 Pro, the normal Tinywhoop, coming out well on top at 6.5 points, and the Neo fairly far below at 3.5 points. So if you've ever been considering buying the Neo in hopes that it's going to be a better option than a Tinywhoop, I'm going to recommend that you switch that hope up and grab yourself a Tinywhoop instead. If you're now there thinking that this all seems to be well out of your depth though, and you don't have a clue on what to buy to get flying, don't leave now. I know that there are so many freaking options to choose from that it can get super overwhelming, which is why I made an entire video putting my top recommended gear into package bundles for you. They start at $100 and increase in $100 increments all the way up to $1,800, so there is something for every budget. You can get amongst that here, along with a free download of all the bundles in one place as well. We're going to see you very soon.